That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Ben. I can see you and I can hear you. And if the technology works today, it should be that this is going to be on both the normal audio streaming services such as Spotify and Apple and all the other podcast platforms, but also on YouTube. So we will be seen as well as heard, Ben, unlike Victorian children.
Indeed. So if you're on podcast now, log off, switch to YouTube. You can see our ugly mugs in glorious Technicolor.
Speak for yourself, Ben.
Yeah, we're very excited about it. And when we have 12 people watching for about 15 seconds and turning off, we will try not to take too much offence. But there we are.
I don't think in the free speech world we take offence. And even if we do take offence, that's okay. We're in the free speech world. We're the Free Speech Union. And that's kind of the point. Yes, we're not worried by offence, are we?
That's right. We have to be thick-skinned about criticism.
As long as it's legal. As long as it's legal.
I would like to start today with something I did last week on Tuesday. And I was in Parliament in one of the very nice old committee rooms in the House of Lords. And I was speaking to...
You were seen in Parliament?
Seen in Parliament, that's right. So this is a gender-critical staff network that's been set up in the parliamentary estate for all different employees of the House of Commons, House of Lords, staff who work in the bars, cleaners, etc. All staff are eligible for this. And this is the sort of counter to the other identity-based staff associations and networks that are organised around identity, sexuality, and so on. And this is to stand up for the rights of gender-critical employees, which is excellent and very much in demand. It's worth... I was speaking to somebody over the weekend, Tom, who had sort of, was aware of this debate going on, but was not familiar with the term gender critical. And I think obviously because we're dealing with these sorts of issues all of the time, every day. I mean, we've had so many requests for help in the last fortnight alone from people with gender critical beliefs who need our assistance. We can kind of assume that people know what that means. And he didn't. And he thought that if you were gender critical, that was like a kind of new form of sexism, and that gender critical people were the people who don't like women, and that were the sort of Andrew Tate segment of opinion. So the gender critical side, the people who reject trans ideology, and these networks have sprung up all over the place, haven't they, Tom? There's Seen in the City and various other places,
and Seen in the civil service, Seen in the police force. I assume here in the new Parliament one, of course, if there is a civil service, that would be quite distinct. But Parliament is, as you say, really quite an important one. Yeah, but it is a clumsy term, gender critical. It is not an obvious term. I think we've spoken before, and again, new viewers won't necessarily know this and stuff that we've spoken about in the past. But we've spoken about the fact that we're not necessarily winning the people who believe in free speech are not necessarily winning the battle of words and terminology and easy to understand language. And a lot of the language has been taken by the perennially offended. Those who are saying, I'm offended, are using words in new ways and confusing everybody. I mean, I think of gender critical in very simple terms as those who believe in biological truth and biological sex. We've often said and made references, haven't we, Ben, to things like Newton and Copernicus and the laws of physics and the laws of biology and the truths of biology. And I think that's really where I understand it. I know it's not exactly that. It's kind of setting itself up as not believing in traditional gender roles, so in a more traditional feminist sense. So we'll often have gender critical feminists who don't believe in traditional boys wear blue and girls wear pink. But in essence, they're setting themselves up against the more extreme transgender activism, which says that biological sex doesn't exist, really. So, it's a confusing term.
Yeah, one of the points I made. So it was their sort of first panel event, and I was speaking with Maya Forstater, who of course won the right in law on appeal for all of us to hold gender critical beliefs. So absolutely foundational landmark case in this area. And I said it to be in a position where staff have to organise around their belief in inverted commas in biological reality it ought to be as ludicrous as having a staff association for people who believe that the earth is round, or who believe in special relativity. There's something as nonsensical about it as that. But there is a demand for this because these staff associations and networks have so much influence on policies, say in NHS trusts. That's something we see time and time again, where you will have an LGBTQIA plus staff association of some kind that's pushing its views about these issues into HR documents that then everybody has to adhere to in that organisation. So clearly there is a demand for a counterweight to that. And this is what the scene networks are starting to do. And Tom, I was speaking about our data, so I should say we probably should introduce ourselves, actually, Tom, for new viewers and listeners. So I'm the director of case operations, and Tom is the director of data. So you're our sort of we sometimes call you the Eye of Sauron, don't we? You see everything
The
going
Eye
on.
of Sauron, or occasionally Guru. When you know, if you're not a data person, then you think it's magic that we do, but it's not actually magic. But yeah, some people call us a guru. I don't think we're allowed to use that word though anymore, Ben. Now that Visit Britain has added it to its list of banned words, so we shall continue to use it, and we shall double down on using it. But yes, so very much sort of the data side of things, and it's really brought alive a lot of what you do, I think, because it's put some shape around the work that I've done. Has put some shape around it, so you can say we win 75% of our cases, and we've had I think when you did the maths, it's about 700 gender critical related cases. So it's a huge number. It's the most recurring theme in our data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I made exactly that point, and I cited that statistic. And it was a good audience there, a mixture of staff, MPs, peers as well. And I always think that when you give that stat, when we really break down the data of who is being cancelled and why and who is doing the cancelling, it's almost like you can feel the air coming out of the room. And I spoke about some of the examples of members of ours that we've helped over the years. We're just over 4 years old now. And likewise, the fact that, I made the point that we've helped these 700 people, but as a percentage within our casework, gender critical beliefs are growing. So it's growing both in absolute numbers, of course, but also in terms of the percentage of what we're dealing with. And
which is really odd, isn't it, Ben? Given what you've just said about the Equality Act, and Maya Forstater, who stood with you last week in that launch event, given what you've said, that still we're seeing this growth in these kinds of cases, even though it's a protected philosophical belief under the Equality Act 2010 now. That's established. And we wonder, I always think it's a bit like the D-Day, VE Day gap. It's this, the D-Day was when Maya won and we landed troops in Normandy, but we had the bloodiest and hardest and grimmest fighting in the 9 months or however many it was until VE Day, because the other side knew that they were losing. So the fight got hotter and hotter and bloodier and bloodier and bloodier.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And there's no way with the law and the precedents that we now have that the other side can win this. But there still is this awful dynamic where people are being put into this kind of meat grinder of employment tribunal and disciplinary stuff at work, and losing contract because of their gender critical beliefs. And as I said, literally just in the last fortnight, the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had so many instances of this where a business or an organization of whatever kind is just acting as though Maya Forstater didn't win, and is acting in complete ignorance of what the law says and of the fact that gender critical beliefs are protected, which is just extraordinary. So we know when people are coming to us saying, look, I've just been sacked or whatever because of my gender critical beliefs, and they've been manifested in a way where they're not harassing anybody, they've just been expressing their views in general about this issue. We know they're going to win. Unless there's some element where they have been, harassing a trans colleague or something. But assuming there's nothing like that going on, and it's just purely on the basis of their beliefs, we know they're going to win. And yet still, HR has not got the message. So I was talking about that, and then over the weekend we've had the news go public of Eleanor Frances, who is or was a civil servant, member of the Free Speech Union, who we have been assisting with exactly the same set of issues and some other elements as well.
And that involves two government departments, her case. I mean, it involves both the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and also the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, because she later moved to that. And she tried to go through, because of the policies that have been put in place that were very much about gender identity and self-declaration of your identity and the effect that had on the workplace, and the politicization of the workplace comes through her case as well. Things that she was overhearing being said by civil servants, particularly when Liz Truss came in. Things that were clearly politicized were not being penalized, but things that were out of kilter with this policy that had come in out of nowhere, or not really out of nowhere. Surprise, surprise, Stonewall were in the background. What she was being penalised for, or at least the complaints process was going nowhere. So we dived straight in from that introductory conversation, Ben. We dived straight in to a very sharp instance of exactly what we're saying, very, very recent and effectively ongoing. But we are helping to fund her case, aren't we, Ben?
We are. There's a crowdfunder on the website, the Free Speech Union, and we will include a link to that below this episode. So if you would like to donate, and it's worth saying as well, so many of our crowdfunders that we've done, I mean, I've lost track of how many we've done for people now, dozens and dozens, I'd have thought. On the basis of £5, £10, £15 donations, we've been able to raise 25, 30, 40,000 pounds to get people who just don't have that kind of money at all the way through to the end of the process, and to win at the end of it. So it makes a tremendous difference. And we've launched that for Eleanor Frances over the weekend, and hopefully that will have the same kind of outcome. Should we move on, Tom?
Should we move on? Should we move on to mention? And this is very related again to something that we do at the FSU, and to an initiative we've mentioned several times, but maybe new to viewers, is the Mactaggart Fund. But the Cardiff University case that came up in the last week, whereby the group called Academic Freedom, the event was going to be called Academic Freedom in the UK, was going to be in Cardiff and related, but set by academics who are associated with the university, employed by the university. But as I understand it, Ben, the university turned around and said, actually, we're going to classify this event as a non-university event, and that triggers the requirement for security costs, room costs, and all the other costs, which I think in this case got up to something like £1,500. And if you're a small little society, which so many are in universities, small societies with not a lot of funds, not a lot of resources, this is what we call the pocket veto. You veto it by putting people out of pocket. And it's a smart move if you want to shut something down, while also being able to say, oh, no, we're not against free speech. We're not against the event. You're allowed to do it, but you're going to have to pay. And I think that's really what's happened here.
And this is the third incident of this nature in a year where the Mactaggart Programme that the Free Speech Union administers has had to come forward and say, we will pay for your venue or your security costs. Because as you said, Tom, if you're a student budget or a group of academics, you just don't have £1,500 to pay for venue hire, and nor should you have to. The university has made this bizarre decision that an event organised by Cardiff academics, to which Cardiff academics and students are invited, is somehow external to the university because it features external speakers, which I imagine would, a vast number of events organised by academics at universities would fall into that category if universities were to behave that way. And so you just get the impression. You get the impression when you see what universities are doing when they're enforcing these sort of swinging costs on people, that they are trying to pocket veto it. They are just trying to make it impractical for a particular event, in this case, to go ahead, but also to kind of grind down people's morale because it just becomes so difficult. It's already quite a bit of faff organising an event to have, 3 speakers to come from another part of the country. So it's Nigel Bigger, Joe Phoenix, and Naomi Waltham-Smith. So it's a really excellent panel.
Yeah, huge name.
It's a great event. So already for the organisers, that's a lot of work to try and put that together. And then when you see, weeks of correspondence, the imposition of security costs and so on that are completely unaffordable, why would you bother next time? That's the effect of it.
And that, I think, Ben, is when we talk about cancel culture, I think a lot of people who don't believe in it or are suspicious that cancel culture exists think of it in terms of a fireworks, whiz bang, a big argument, and something's cancelled by the authorities. Someone's deplatformed. Something's not allowed to happen. And a lot of the time, yes, that happens. But I think that's the tip of the iceberg. Underneath the water, it's exactly this war of attrition. It's the grinding down, the administrative grinding down of people who want to do things like this event and speak things freely, who are ground down until it's what's the point? Why bother? And so it doesn't go ahead. It doesn't happen. And it's a drip, drip, drip. And so that then means that those who say cancel culture doesn't exist can point at it and say, well, you pulled it. We didn't pull it. You pulled it. So, you can't claim there's cancel culture. And it's the oldest trick in the book, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this case, obviously, we've stepped in and say this event should be going ahead. It will be in a few days' time from when we're recording this episode now on a Monday morning. So it should be going ahead. And we'll see if there's any sort of last minute surprise thrown in by the university. But yeah, as I said, this is the third time it's happened. It's happened in Cambridge. It's happened at Bristol. And one thing that will be happening, of course, later this year from August is that the Higher Education Act will come into effect. And one of the things that will do, and this is unfortunately only for English universities, so this will not help the situation in Cardiff, but it will raise the barrier for universities imposing security costs. So it should become unusual for universities to be able to do that. It should not be the case that having 3 academics come and speak should be the sort of event where the university says, okay, right, well, that requires security, and therefore you, the organisers, are going to have to pay for it. It will raise the threshold for that. But as I said, that is not the case. That will not be the case in Wales, which will still be under the older Education Act from, I think, 1986. So it's unfortunate that the Act will not have that coverage. But it might be, this is a bit nebulous perhaps, but it might be that this changes the culture in the sector more generally, and that England, at the very least, can hopefully be an example to universities in Wales and Scotland of what academic freedom of speech ought to look like.
My concern there, Ben, is we talked earlier about gender-critical beliefs. We talked about the fact that it's been years now since gender-critical beliefs have been protected by the Equality Act, and yet we're still seeing the problem. Similarly, a legal win, a legislative win, it's huge, the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, and the amendment that we campaigned for, that we've got in there, that should eliminate the pocket veto. The point is, it should. It doesn't mean it will. And when you've got a powerful set of actors who are not that interested in freedom of expression and who are not that interested in freedom of speech or interested in the easy life, then It's what's it going to be like in practice? I don't want to be a negative Nelly, Ben, but that is my concern, if you will.
Yeah, I think I mean that's completely reasonable. It's going to take a long time to filter through. The difference is that when you're dealing with an employment situation, and let's say it's a disciplinary, and that's going to take a few months to play out. Then you go to ACAS, then you go to the employment tribunal. That whole thing can take 2 years, say.
Yeah.
Whereas and a lot of money, as we've said, and people need to crowdfund for it and so on. Whereas with the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, the process is much more straightforward than that, and so it should be that the redress of grievance will be a much simpler and much cheaper process. It will not be something that's costing £40,000 to go and do. But
and in fact,
right.
It's the other way around, isn't it, Ben? Hopefully, we did an episode when the sanctions for universities that don't abide by the protection of freedom of speech. We did an episode a few months ago, and those sanctions that were being proposed, and we shall see ultimately whether they come through, would include naming and shaming universities, and that's bad press. No one wants to be put on a bad list, on a naughty list, and also monetary. So almost a sort of reverse Uno of the pocket veto, and saying, well, here you go, you're going to get fined. So if the process is easier and you've got some real sanctions at the end of that process, then that is, you've turned me around a little bit there, Ben.
Good.
I'm a little bit more optimistic than I was 45 seconds ago.
That's what we like to hear. Yeah, no, it's really important. I mean, but I do take the point that it is not going to be the case that this act comes into effect in August, and from September, every university administrator is suddenly an ardent defender of freedom of speech and academic freedom. It will not be the case that universities have internalized what this act will mean for them. It will be the case, I will bet now, that the Free Speech Union and academic freedom groups across the country are having to fight and make complaints to universities, and having to go through to the regulator and so on. So all of that stuff will be going on, but we will have the wind in our sails, and gradually universities will have to internalize what this piece of legislation means for them. And I think there's some signs that there is, I mean, I don't overstate it, but there is some thinking going on in universities that we're aware of, where they are thinking, okay, this is coming down the pipeline. What will it mean? So I'm optimistic, but there will be stuff to kind of tidy up. Absolutely.
It's so sad. I think we going back to our data. It's so sad that we are in this position now. I joined the Free Speech Union in 2022, and we put some shape around our data, extracted the more interesting seams and glimmers of trend from the data. And we looked up the list of universities that are most culpable of suppressing freedom of expression, suppressing freedom of speech, the essential elements you need to have a university, to have robust debate, to teach people how to think. And those universities were our oldest, our greatest, the Russell Group. They were the ones that have been around for a millennium or more. And that is something that is so and again, I don't want to, I'm being the negative Nelly today. It is so soulful. I think I've got a bag that I take shopping with me to Tesco or Sainsbury, depending on which direction I go on. I don't want to sort of brand it, or Waitrose. I don't want to drop to any brand in it. But my bag is from the Common Sense Society, and on one side it's got a quote from Sir Roger Scruton, which is it's difficult to build something up, but so easy to tear something down. It took a millennium to build Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, and it's taken the years since I left one of those 30 years ago to completely transform it out into something that has no recognizable. It's totally different. If I go back now and they ask for money, they're not going to get it from me, because and maybe this is another great good thing. The alumni from these universities are opening their eyes and saying, it's not the place I studied at. It's not the place I went up to. It's not the place that shaped me and formed me. And it's so sad for the people going up now. And again, I don't want to sound like an old codger, but I think that's an important point, the alumni waking up to this. But yeah, we will reverse it. We're not going to be all negative Nellies. We will reverse it, and this is a huge, big step forward. We should move on. We should move on, Ben, before I depress you completely.
Well, we're moving on and moving back 1,000 years.
We're moving back 1,500 years, aren't we?
Yeah, more or less. So this is the news that listeners and viewers may well have seen, that the Anglo-Saxons, who have been embroiled in this battle for survival within historiography, have now been cancelled. And the Anglo-Saxon England journal, Cambridge, has been renamed as Early Medieval England and Its Neighbours, which is somewhat less evocative, I would suggest.
And that's not the same kind of language.
No, and this is something that has been going on. I think probably before. Well, I think certainly before 2020, but it gathered pace post George Floyd, and is part of this sort of wretched importing of American cultural norms into England, United Kingdom, and this is one of those things that really just gets under my skin. It really aggravates me, but because
you're a historian, though, so I imagine it doubly gets under your skin.
Yeah, and it's just part of this awful sort of cringing towards the fashions of the imperial power of our day, and purely for reasons of American domestic politics. The term Anglo-Saxon is now deemed to be, again, inverted commas, problematic. And so, therefore, even though the Anglo-Saxons, who did, in fact, refer to themselves as Anglo-Saxons, that term is now to be dropped, to be chiseled out of the monuments, as it were. And we're left in this situation where the mere study of them is becoming tainted with the suggestion of American racial disputes and racial politics and grievance and so on. And my final point on this rant is just that, of course, there are many ancient peoples who we have imposed names on for various reasons. Either their own name has not survived, so whether that's, I don't know, various Native American tribes, or the Byzantine Empire is a word they never would have used to describe themselves, or so on. But that emphatically is not the case here. They did call themselves Anglo-Saxons. Their kings referred to themselves as kings of the Anglo-Saxons. And all of that is being jettisoned to appease the cultural sensitivities of a very, very small number of American academics. So I wanted to rant on that subject. Thank you for humouring me. Very irritating.
Well, it's very irritating, and I think one of the reasons it's very irritating is that when we talk about the Anglo-Saxons and when we talk about King Alfred and the various kingdoms and history of when where the Angles came from and where the Saxons came from and when they thrust it together to create Anglo-Saxon, you're talking about the foundation of our nation.
Yeah,
and I'm going to narrow it down to England here, but you're talking about the foundation of our nation, and so what's happening is that the very foundation of our house, of our who we are as Englishmen or English women, is being attacked. It's being chiseled away, but also it's being chiseled away for a very, very obvious purpose, which is if we take that foundation away, the old house will collapse and we can pour in new concrete. And we need new concrete so that we have a foundation on which to build this new woke, whatever you want to call it, countercultural, all the different words that are out there at the moment. And so they have to find a way to pour this new concrete. And in that new concrete are things like, because one of the defenses we could have said BIPOC. I can't remember exactly what that stands for. It's something
Black indigenous people of colour.
Black indigenous people of colour, exactly. And we've made the point before that in England, indigenous would obviously mean the Anglo-Saxons. So is that really what they meant when they say that? Because it's an American term. It's a US term. It's talking about the Native Americans and the people who were pushed off the land when the New World was found. or talking, not usually talking, but perhaps talking about the Aztecs or the Incas, who were similarly colonized, but different empires seem to get away with it in different ways or more than others.
Well, and they're groups, of course, that all ruthlessly slaughtered their neighbours, as every group of humans who have ever lived have done, by the way.
Yes. No, very rarely do neighbours live peaceably.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely. In fact, I think it's a blink of an eye in history, isn't it, where that happens. But what's happening is then it's another reverse Uno, is that you replace the foundation, you pour the new concrete, and lo and behold, all of the grievance policy study material from US universities can just be moved across and dropped onto Anglo-Saxon soil to completely mix up my metaphor. But that's what they're doing here. And then our youngsters, Ben, so our young kids, next generation, are going to grow up and there is no foundation. It's gone. It is this new concrete and this new structure on top. And they're going to come back to us and say, you got it wrong, because actually you don't understand the foundations of where everything came from.
What's so weird about this, and this arises because it's been imported unthinkingly from America, is that actually, if you were a really cunning progressive propagandist, you would take the story of the Anglo-Saxon arrival in Britain and you would describe it as the arrival of men, women, and children on small boats on the southern coast of England, who arrived and formed a dynamic new society and integrated with people who were already here, which is the argument that is now put forward in the historiography. It used to be the case that the native Celts and Romano-British were sort of massacred by the Anglo-Saxons. Now people are obviously very uneasy about making the argument that an infusion of new people will precipitate conflict, and so people are very anxious to argue that
the Normans were very peaceful.
Right.
They only built a couple of castles, but other than that, it was a good time.
It's a kind of ludicrous argument. I mean,
and the harrowing of the North never happened.
Exactly.
The North recovered quickly.
Exactly, and extrapolating this into other invasions or other periods of history, you expose the nonsense for what it is. But nonetheless, if I were so inclined, I would take that story of people arriving on small boats, stitch it together to this idea that actually it was a peaceful integration of different ethnic groups. And you could turn that into a sort of morality play about Windrush and about 20th century British history and multiculturalism and so on. So if they had their brains on, that's what they do. And that's how you plug Britain's ancient history into the argument that Britain has always been a nation of immigrants, which it hasn't been. I mean, I completely reject that, which is not to say that you can't make a multiracial society work, etc. But they don't do that. They bring the whole set of ideas of BIPOC in from America, and instead of plugging it into a British context, it's entirely about what this tiny minority of perpetually unhappy American academics think.
Two things I'd say about that, Ben. One positive, one negative. The first thing is, I think you're trying to be too clever because you're clever. So what you're doing is you're cunningly linking the two narratives to come up with a justification that is more coherent than the one that is being used by the activists.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that most of the people there, the audience who they're trying to sort of manipulate by recasting history, are so already pre-programmed to hear about anti-racism, colonization, that better story, that more coherent narrative, which might work in a dinner party or might work amongst I don't know what set would particularly think, oh yeah, that's quite a nice connection. But those who are imbued and swimming in the new language of the new culture wouldn't see it that way. However, the positive thing is, I do think Britain is different, and I think we are termed. Let's going back to another completely unrelated topic. We're termed TERF Island, aren't we? Trans, exclusionary, radical feminist island. That's to say, we have had a much more vocal pushback against the more extreme transgender identity politics, compared even to the USA, or particularly to the USA. We are standout like that because we are different. And so it doesn't work And it hasn't worked with that. So perhaps there's much reason for hope there that the deeper roots won't take the new concrete. And actually, we really are an old land. We are an old land with old mysteries and old stories and old roots that are just not going to go away. And I hold great hope out for that. Maybe not here, sat in the middle of London, where I think there's so much lack of thinking going on. Look at sort of we talked about protesters in previous episodes who have no idea why they're on a protest, or students who are camping out and really don't understand the issues, and they're linking together all of these different issues, as sort of the climate change is being linked with the Israeli-Palestine, being linked with any number of issues, anti-racism, they're all being bundled together, anti-colonialism as sort of anti-capitalist stuff. So you'll always see, the old favourites at these different kinds of protest. So that's going on, and but underneath, I think Britain is a very old place. I always like thinking about the Civil War battlefields, where people still talk about the ghosts that haunt those battlefields. These are the myths and the legends of our history and of our land. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. And perhaps there's even hope for youngsters here who are enthralled by them and go away and study them and become great historians and retell the stories.
I think, I'm sure we've talked about this in another podcast episode, but the take-up of history podcasts and YouTube channels or whatever, overwhelmingly driven by the young, it's really encouraging. And I think that accretion of layers of history that you find in other countries as well, but particularly richly in England and the United Kingdom, as now is something that is so precious and is not something that we want to be flattened away by taking the flavour out of it, by removing terms like Anglo-Saxon, by homogenizing it all. I think is much to be lamented. But we've probably done enough lamenting on this subject, Tom. There's a very good article by Ed West in The Spectator on this that I'd recommend reading.
Yes.
And we'll move on, shall we?
Yeah, let's move on to the next episode, which we've labelled the sushi case, which is another victory for free speech, actually, because what happened is that there was a Japanese professor who was employed by the School of Oriental and African Studies, otherwise known as SOAS, in London. And she said that she'd suffered racial discrimination from a fellow academic who subjected her to racist microaggressions, including gazing at her while walking towards her and recommending a sushi restaurant which she might enjoy. And this was reported in GB News, it was reported in the Mail, it was reported in the Telegraph. But the employment tribunal judge has dismissed the claim, Ben, and has said this just doesn't hold any water. I mean, this is just a polite conversation you could have with anyone. I would be down the clink multiple times over, Ben, if I hadn't in some way pointed out, something of interest to someone I knew was from a different part of the world.
Said, conversation.
It's conversation. If someone's from Poland, you say, "Oh my goodness, yes, I went to Warsaw once, and I really enjoyed, I don't know, the food, maybe."
Can I quote from Justice Underhill's ruling?
Yes.
Some words of wisdom that I think our viewers and listeners will not need persuading of, but others might do. It is also important not to encourage a culture of hypersensitivity or the imposition of legal liability in respect of every unfortunate phrase. So a culture of hypersensitivity. And it's excellent to see forceful pushback in this case against the idea that speaking to a Japanese colleague about sushi must be racist, and to have a blast of judicial common sense. I think it's quite welcome, Tom. So we're always trying to look on the bright side, aren't we? Because otherwise we can be a bit gloomy.
We're going crazy. But I think we do see this with our justices, and I don't know whether it's the employment tribunal. So certainly we see it in the high courts. We see our best minds are still making sensible decisions. I think that's what happened with the Meyer Forstater case. With the Granger test, which is the test under the Equality Act, that the believing in biological sex is worthy of respect in a democratic society. And I think we also saw something with the Harry Miller final judgment, that we don't live in a society where you're not allowed. We don't live in 1984 George Orwell's world, and we don't want to. That is not the direction we want to go into. So some of these comments and some of these sentences that the judges put into their final finding are really quite powerful and really quite important to remember as well, because they do set important precedent, and they make points very germanely, I think, that crop up again and again and may never get to the point of employment tribunal, but they're nice points of reference, I think, for people who are in the heat of battle to come back to, and to say, that helped me, that perspective helped me a lot. So yeah, we are allowed to point out cultural reality, Ben, which is good to know. You're not going to prison anytime soon.
I mean, the other point I make about this is just that if the presumption in a workplace, or workplaces generally, is that you can't speak about distinctions between people, different cultural backgrounds, where people are from. And of course, this is one of the great microaggressions, isn't it? Asking somebody where they're from, and much less expressing any further interest in that forbidden topic, as the academic in this case did. But all that does, of course, is stop people from different backgrounds speaking to each other, because you just think, well, it's just not worth the hassle. I mean, I've got no ill will towards you, but if me having an entirely innocent conversation could be misconstrued or weaponized in some way, why would you bother?
There's also an interesting point about a person. Where are they from?
Yeah.
If someone's proud of where they're from, they'll want to talk about it. They'll want to explain it and say, it's different to England like this, it's similar to England like that. I've really enjoyed this, but you guys could learn from us about that. And you start to have it turns into a relationship. I'm not saying you end up going on a date with the person.
Well, then you open a whole other set of issues, Tom.
Yeah, I've opened a whole other set of issues. But you know what? I mean, whoa, we would end up, and I'm glad he mentions hypersensitivity, because it was always mocked in the early days, wasn't it? Political correctness gone mad. Mm-hmm. This is political correct. Well, we're seeing it. We're seeing political correctness gone mad, and we're seeing the pushback against it. Thank the Lord. So yeah, this is a good result. This is a good result indeed.
There's one other thing we're going to talk about this quite briefly, because we want to do justice to this topic, and I think we'll return to it next week. And this is the report that's coming out. It's not yet come out at the time we're recording this, from Lord Walney, about protecting teachers who are in the midst of Batley Grammar School type scenarios. I.e., they've shown, or they've been accused of showing, something that is deemed to be blasphemous to Muslims, and obviously that's very important. It's been previewed in the press papers over the weekend, but we do want to come back to that once we've actually seen the report. So that's sort of one of the biggest free speech news items over the weekend. We've not ignored it. We do want to come back to that next time in detail.
It's really important. We do really come back to that, because I think the issue of blasphemy, and we said it before, is one that is going to take a long, long time, where the issue of gender critical views being worthy of respect in a democratic society is one that we know we're going to win. We know we're going to win. But the issue of blasphemy, I think, is still, there's a lot of fighting ahead yet. We're much earlier in that battle. But the fact that we've got teachers hiding 2-3 years after that showing of the Prophet Muhammad, cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, is profoundly disturbing to any of us who value freedom of expression, freedom of speech. It really doesn't sit well, and yet it's been allowed to sit for too long. So this will be a really, really good, if we can make it happen, this will be amazing.
This is, I think, also this is the litmus test for free speech organisations, human rights campaigners, etc. of whether they are able to engage with this issue or whether they just sort of skirt it, dodge away from it because they're too afraid of talking about it. We do not skirt away from it. We've been very active in helping, for instance, Hat and Tash. We were involved in the Batley Grammar School case at the time as well. We've been involved in various other incidents as well, some public, many not, related to blasphemy in some way.
Well, one line of attack which I found since joining the Free Speech Union quite interesting, I wouldn't have thought of at first blush, Ben, and I know you're right in the heart of this. One line of attack is that many of the organizations that are trying to shut people down on the basis of it's blasphemous, so this sort of anti-blasphemy extremism, which is another phrase we've talked about before, many of those organizations are charities, which means that they're getting tax benefits. Then sometimes they're getting money from the state indirectly or directly. And so where public money is involved and where the benefits of being a charity, which are multiple, are on the table, it's a good line of attack, actually, to say you need to go and have a look at what these guys are doing, because you can't, they're not meeting the objects of the charity. So we've used that a few times, haven't we, Ben? And it's one that I think has really found purchase as well. But that's part of guerrilla warfare. That's guerrilla warfare, isn't it?
And we'll get into this next time. But of course, people will quite rightly hear that and think, well, how on earth did we get to a position where they were registered to be charities in the first place? But this is, as you say, this is one of the ways in which we can kick back. That is something that we and indeed others have done. So we'll get into all of those issues next time. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to add, except, as always, thank you for listening and thank you for watching. To those of us who've been watching our beautiful comely selves.
I need a haircut.
I remember to iron a shirt, Tom.
You did all right. You did all right.
Okay. Thank you for putting up with us.
Yes.
If that is indeed the case. And you will see us next time, or not, if you've had enough.
God willing, if the technology is on our side, which is always, we wake up on a Monday morning and send up a prayer to whichever God we pray to. For me, it's, I don't know, Osiris or something, and then we'll hope we're back next week. But thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening, and we will speak to you in a week's time.
Bye-bye.